Welcome everyone to what is the first joint venture between River Bookshop and Thrive Amherstburg, From Climate Emergency to Action, Strategies to Help Us Thrive, with speaker Claire Sanders. My name is Lori Whiteman. I am the lead bookseller at the River Bookshop. And before we get started, I would just like to do a land overview. So while we're all taking part virtually, the land that the River Bookshop is located on is an area originally inhabited by Indigenous people and who have traveled this area since time immemorial. This territory is within the lands honored by the Wampum Treaties, agreements between the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenni Lenape, and the allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around this beautiful area. Specifically, we would like to acknowledge the presence of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwa, the Odawa, the Potawatomi, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. Thank you, and I'll hand it over to Corey.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Corey Reno. I'm one of the Thrive directors, so thank you for joining us online tonight. Just have a few housekeeping items to take care of before we move forward with the presentation. So all participants as they come in will be muted. If you can keep your mic on mute, that'd be greatly appreciated. It'll just help us minimize any background noise. Also, your camera doesn't have to be on to participate in tonight's presentation, but you're welcome to keep it on. Tonight's presentation will be recorded and available later on our YouTube page for you to either view again or for those that aren't able to attend live tonight. After tonight's presentation, we'll open it up to some questions. You can raise your digital hand within Zoom or simply just unmute yourself and we'll call upon you, and or you can add it to the chat as well. There's an option to add a question to the chat feature. So now that those housekeeping items are out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's special guest presenter, Claire Sanders. Claire has been with Essex Regional Conservation Authority for over 7 years, first as the Remedial Action Plan Coordinator for the Detroit River Canadian Cleanup, and now as the Climate Change Specialist. In these roles, she facilitates partnerships and identifies research and work plan priorities for many individuals and the agencies needed to address the regional ecological challenges that are too complex to be addressed by a single organization alone. Claire holds a master's degree in biology and a Bachelor of Education from the University of Windsor and lives with her husband and daughter in Kingsville. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Claire.
And I'll remember to unmute myself before I start speaking. Thank you so much, Corey, and thank you to Thrive and to the River Bookshop for having me. I know we had been hoping to have this presentation in person at the beautiful space at River Bookshop, but here we are in our houses still in June. On the upside, it's raining, I guess, so which maybe is why we have such a good turnout tonight. So thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. I'm really pleased to be here. And I think this evening I'm going to talk about some of the impacts that we're seeing locally in the region, you know, everything from small impacts to really big impacts that impact our everyday lives in the region. And then look at some of the things we're doing to both adapt to those changes as well as stop hopefully the worst impacts from occurring through mitigation plan. So I'm just gonna share my screen now. And I'm just gonna, I'm gonna launch into it, but when I'm sort of speaking, I just kind of get right into things. So if there's any questions at all, please, I would ask Corey to even interrupt me, or any of the directors just to interrupt me, or anybody to interrupt me. But there certainly will be time at the end for questions. So I sort of frame this again around strategies to help our communities thrive, because I think climate change presents those opportunities. And I think climate change, when we start thinking about it, and I've been thinking about it a lot over the last 2 years, it can be very overwhelming, and it can be very not knowing where to start with climate action. But I think it also provides these opportunities to find these strategies to help our communities thrive. So just a little bit about conservation authorities, Conservation Authorities 101. So IRCA is one of 36 conservation Ontarios in Ontario. We are uniquely organized on a watershed basis. And because we cross municipal boundaries, all environmental decisions can be assessed on the basis of their impact to the entire watershed. We all, of course, live in and are connected by these watersheds. And so it's our responsibility to, protect water quality and use water wisely, and protect our ecological neighborhoods. So we were created in 1973. We have 9 jurisdictions in our municipality, or sorry, 9 municipalities in our jurisdiction, and we manage over 4,200 acres in terms of conservation areas, and trails as well. So over 80 kilometers of trails. Just a little bit of background about our region before I launch into it. And my colleague, Katie Stamler, I see is on the call as well. She's a Amherstburg resident and a member of Thrive. But every couple of years, one thing that Katie does is she undertakes a water quality report card, or watershed report card on her region. And so she reports on a number of indicators. One of them is surface water quality. And so the grades of our on our report card range from C to F, with mostly D grades. So phosphorus and E. coli are measured in almost every watershed, and high E. coli levels in some streams from either faulty septic systems or manure storage are directly related to that poor water quality in those watersheds. And the benthic invertebrates found in the streams are tolerant to poor water conditions. So those result in those low scores. And phosphorus sources have remained constant and reflect the land uses in our region, which are primarily agricultural. We also, when we put out this report card, one of the indicators is forest cover conditions. And those grades are mostly Ds and Fs through the region. And when we initially measured in 1973, our region's forest cover was less than 4%, which was the lowest in Canada. Currently, so we've planted, I think, over 6 million trees or something like that in the last almost 50 years. And the current forest cover is up at 5.7%. This year, we're planting over 125,000 trees in partnership with landowners across the region. So I think we all know what the significance of our region is in terms of natural heritage. No other region in the province or country has higher biodiversity, has a greater number of significant or rare species, has a greater diversity of habitat types. In the Essex region alone, there are more than 270 rare species of plants, 37 of which are species at risk. So we have a highly fragmented and degraded ecosystem. The remaining small isolated remnants of natural habitat constitute one of the lowest percentages of any region in all of Ontario. So what does this have to do with climate change? Well, we know that climate change is a threat multiplier. So this is the Detroit River or Lake Erie, but across ecosystems, across any vulnerabilities, in our region, our population, we know that things aren't going to get better. And I think one of the things that Katie often does in her presentations when she talks about regional water quality is she talks about that Dr. Seuss, things are not going to get better. They're not unless everybody does their part. And again, in the face of climate change, we know that things aren't going to get better unless we substantially change some of the ways that we're doing things, or increase things like tree planting and some of the best management practices for water quality. So again, what does this have to do with climate change? I'm not going to get into climate science this evening, but the scientific evidence for the warming of the climate system is unequivocal. Evidence found in ice cores, glaciers, tree rings, ocean sediments, coral reefs, sedimentary rocks show that the Earth's climate responds to changes in greenhouse gas levels. And this evidence reveals that the current warming is occurring roughly 10 times faster than the average rate of ice age recovery. And amazingly, we've known about this for a very long time. We've known about it since the 1850s, really, that this cause and effect from greenhouse gases, human-induced greenhouse gases, in the atmosphere. So we know that this has been happening. It's been exponentially accelerated because of the post-war revolution, with increasing technologies. And really, we're starting to see those impacts right now. And these are just some of the impacts from the last few years. And especially I think back to 2019, when farmers in the region couldn't plant until mid-June. And we know they ended up planting a lot of soybeans that year because it was too wet to plant corn that year. And we know that planting soybeans year after year is bad for soil health. Our water quality team is on high alert every year for blue-green algae blooms. And that year in 2019, our forestry team couldn't plant about 20,000 trees because they couldn't get into the fields and they couldn't prepare the fields in time. And those trees actually went in the garbage because they started to mold. So, we see these impacts throughout the region, these devastating impacts, and of course, the devastating flooding that we've seen, not only shoreline flooding, but also things like basement flooding and overland flooding as well. So 3 main impacts, direct impacts of climate change will lead to a host of indirect impacts. So the region is getting warmer, wetter, and wilder. And I always put this up because I find it fascinating. If there's tools out there where you can go and see these projections for yourself. The tools aren't just for scientists or climatologists. You can go to climateatlas.ca and you can navigate to Essex County and you can see what the county is going to look like in the next 30 or 50 years. So there's a number of variables on this site. You can go to look at very hot days. So those are days above 30. And you can put in your time periods. So this is 2021 to 2050, so the next 30 years. And we're expected to see an increase of 23 days over the next 30 years. So looking at about 30 days above zero in the next couple of decades. And then if we look at very hot days and you increase that time period, and this is under a high carbon scenario, which is the path that we're currently on. And you look at the time period even further down, so 2050 to 2080. 2050 is not that far away. It's closer to 2050 than we are to 1991. We're looking at an increase of 50 days, so upwards of 60 days. So that's over 2 months of days above 30 for the region. So it's significant. It's going to be hot. And this is sort of another visualization of that. We're looking at projected extremely hot days, more heat waves, more droughts, fewer cold days. Mean, minimum, and maximum daily temperatures are projected to significantly increase in every season. And that's climateatlas.ca. You can go on and you can look at precipitation. You can look at if you're a gardener, go on and look at the days when the first frost-free day of the season, the last frost-free. So there's tons of variables you can look at and play with on that site. And you can also look at precipitation. And we know that it's going to be wetter. And we've already seen this. Annual precipitation is expected to increase in the winter and spring. It'll get wetter instead of snow, and there'll be a slight decline in the summer. So even a slight decline of rain in the summer, plus those increase of hot days, we're looking at more droughts. And, again, I'm thinking back a couple of years and even last year at some points as well, where we just reached a tipping point. We had continuous rain through a couple of weeks, and there was, we had record high lake levels and river levels, and there was literally nowhere for the water to go. And among other indirect impacts, homes and roads were destroyed. Farmers couldn't prepare their fields before crop insurance deadlines. We couldn't get into fields. So numerous impacts there. And then when you look at rainfall, and especially when you go on that climateatlas.ca, it might just look like a couple of more millimeters in a certain season, but looking at that alone doesn't really give you the full picture of what's happening, because we have to look at how the rain is actually falling. And we're expecting that the rain is going to be falling faster over shorter periods of time. And these intense precipitation events are expected to occur more frequently. And so these are the type of rain events that overwhelm our infrastructure and things like storm sewers like that. So, I guess, this is just one example. There have been a number of big storms. I'm sure, likely there's somebody on this call who is impacted. This is just City of Windsor data. It's not a full county data. But in those couple of years, there were almost 9,000 reports of flooding in the city that was mostly basement flooding, costing the city millions each time, and tons of insured losses, and local budgets being shifted to cover disaster relief. And I'm sure, again, this is City Windsor map, but we know it's happened in every community in our region. And then, of course, when we're talking about the wilds category, I'd also put our fluctuating lake levels in that category as well. We know that our lake levels are going to continue to be variable. So they are variable seasonally. So we see the highs and the lows throughout a season or throughout a year. But we also know that our highs are going to be higher and our lows are going to be lower than ever before. And so that puts hundreds or thousands of shoreline homes and low-lying structures at risk of significant flooding and erosion. These are the number of statements. One of the things ERCA does is flood forecasting. The last 2 years, we saw hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of days under flood watch. So there was a potential for flooding each and every day. And then we saw 15 separate flood events in 2019 and 16 separate flood events, shoreline flood events in 2020. And this sort of static lake level was so high that it is exceeding our thresholds for monitoring and being able to predict the effects associated with wind speed, direction, and duration. So it was also wreaking havoc on gravity outlets. So again, storm sewers are already full of lake water before rain events even occur. So it really limits their capacity to move water. And there will be indirect impacts, across all sectors, extensive indirect impacts. And again, we're already seeing these indirect impacts to our nature and ecosystems. Warming streams and lakes will impact aquatic species in many ways, including increasing blue-green algae or nuisance algae, not just in the lake, but in things like stormwater ponds where, or local ponds. We know there will be, with the rising lake levels, there will be impacts to our coastal wetlands. We're likely to see new invasive species move into the region. Plants, trees, and some animals will be impacted or could be entirely displaced. So in the Essex region, again, it's added stress to an already stressed system. In terms of health, human health, up until 2018, black-legged ticks or deer ticks, which are the ones that spread Lyme disease, were only found in the Point Pelee area. And in 2019, the health unit had to update their Lyme disease risk map to include the majority of Essex County, as they're now finding black-legged ticks across the region. In 2017, the species of mosquito capable of carrying the Zika virus was found in the region. It was not carrying Zika, but they are typically found mosquitoes that are found in tropical environments, same as the equine, the mosquito that carries the equine encephalitis as well. And so, climate change has not only been identified as a threat to physical health, but also psychologists are warning that the mental health impacts and the economic toll they take are real and likely to spread and need closer study. I mean, I put this picture, I got that one from the Windsor Star of this woman with all of her belongings on her lawn. And, my heart aches for her because every time it rains, and I'm sure anybody who's had a flooded basement or lives on the shoreline, every time the wind blows or it rains, you go home to check your home is okay and your belongings. And that certainly takes a mental health toll after a while. In terms of agriculture, I could spend hours just on the impacts alone. So I'm trying to get through this quickly. But I think we're starting to understand some of the implications for our agriculture in the region. I think we'll see both risks and opportunities for agriculture. There'll be longer growing seasons, but things like extreme weather, like hail and wind, or extensive drought can cause immense damage to production systems. And farmers, I also wanted to note, because I'm not going to really touch on it later, but farmers play an important role in mitigating greenhouse gases as well by managing their soil health. So I think we need to find ways to help our farmers, and continue to find ways, because we already do work a lot with our farming community, but it will become increasingly important in the future to help them manage their soil health and potentially compensate them for sequestering carbon in their soils. And of course, municipal infrastructure is being significantly impacted, from summer roads, road buckling, to overwhelmed sewers, to parks. We're seeing these storm sewers full of water and flooded basements and all of these pieces. Many municipalities are undertaking stormwater master plans and are using that opportunity to look at projected increases in rainfall and how to manage this through the future. And finally, I would suggest there is a substantial impact to businesses and economic development as well, whether it's from extreme weather interruptions to business activities, or things like workers in warehouses and greenhouses and fields or factories that are subject to extreme temperatures, and not just their personal health, but also the interruption of business, because need to take care of workers and give them breaks during those extreme temperatures. And we're early June, and it looks like we'll be going into an extended heat wave already next week. So, and finally, just on this note of impacts, I think climate change is expected to impact the community inequitably as well. And I guess that's maybe not a word, but I'm thinking of those people who don't have adequate housing or air conditioning or pools or backyards. So it's been interesting to me working in climate change that I've been brought into conversations about affordable housing. And that's what's so interesting to me about the Thrive initiative, because looking at affordable housing is climate action. And I think clearly Thrive has recognized that. So the relationship between climate change and social inequality, they say, is sort of this vicious cycle, right? Where there's, initial inequality makes disadvantaged groups suffer disproportionately from the adverse effects of climate change, resulting in greater subsequent inequality. And that's particularly apparent during a pandemic, I would suggest, when public spaces are closed and potentially cooling centers like libraries are closed, and things that we sort of really have to think about going forward as well. So and I could go on and on and on just about the impacts that we're experiencing. But because all of these reasons, and many of these reasons, in response to this, in the fall of 2019, the Windsor-Essex County Environment Committee approved a climate emergency declaration. And in November of that year, the city and the county, as well as IRCA, endorsed this declaration. And I believe Amherstburg actually declared before, and subsequently the town of Tecumseh and the town of Essex have also declared climate emergencies. They've joined over 500 Canadian municipalities who have also declared climate emergencies. And if you're interested in learning more about those 500, or at least the communities in Ontario that have declared climate emergencies, the University of Windsor Law Center for Cities has a map on their website, which is really neat. You can go online, and it's an interactive map, and you can actually look at the communities that have declared climate emergencies and what impact that climate emergency is having on things like official plans or zoning bylaws. So you can see what actions they are taking. So what does a climate emergency declaration mean? Your municipality has declared a climate emergency. Now what? Well, the emergency declaration that was crafted by the Windsor-Essex County Environment Committee was carefully crafted to ensure that it wasn't just words. It actually, there is action in there. It says, this is an emergency with no foreseeable conclusion, which will require permanent and robust changes in how the city and county conduct business. And further, that this is an emergency and we need to reduce overall emissions, and that administration report back on and accelerate work urgently work towards the reduction of emissions and preparing for our climate future. So this was less than 2 years ago, but it speaks to the action required from a climate emergency. So now what? And, there is certainly a lot of climate action underway across all municipalities, whether or not they have specific language about it or not. There's certainly a lot of action taking place, not only from IRCA, but all of our municipalities, the health unit, to address some of these impacts. And certainly municipalities and agencies do have a significant role to play in both adapting to climate change and reducing risk. So we saw this picture last week or 2 weeks ago, I think, when Yasminka was talking about climate change. So there's those two sides to it, right? Adaptation, actions to manage the impacts. And then on the other side, there's the mitigation. And I'm not going to talk too much about the municipal role yet, but I wanted to just mention a couple of sort of region-wide projects that IRCA is working on, and some in partnership with the County of Essex as well. So one of the things that IRCA obviously does is identify, study, and map natural hazard areas like floodplains and unstable slopes along rivers, lakes, streams, and wetlands. And if these hazards aren't understood properly, they can certainly pose risks to communities, especially when considering development activities. So in the Essex region, over 80% of our shoreline is developed, and there's thousands of flood vulnerable structures that are located in floodplains because they predate floodplain management regulations. So this hazard mapping is a key tool to help municipalities direct future development away from areas or natural or human-made hazards. In many parts of this region and the province as well, the floodplain mapping that we have is out of date. On average, it's 30 years old, or is in some areas just not available at all. And so with a changing climate, we really can't rely on decades-old data and assumptions about rainfall and storm surge. So one of the things that we need to do as a region is update our hazard maps. Some of the oldest hazard maps we have are from 1976. Some of the newest flood maps we have are from 1991. And this is how we did it back then. We used these, awesome air photos. And certainly you can imagine the technology has evolved and the modeling has evolved a lot since then. So it's important to do some of that work in the future. So there are some areas of our region that just really haven't been mapped at all because they weren't areas of development previously. So, there may be changes to topography or more impervious areas where water can't run off. So one of the things we need to do is look at our floodplain mapping, and the county and IRCA are working together to update some of those flood maps, as is happening across the region as well, or across the province. The other piece that we've been looking at a lot over the last 2 years is how to help our nature and ecosystems adapt to the changes that we're seeing. Species are the building blocks of our ecosystems, and reducing risks to species posed by climate change is critical for maintaining biodiversity. This could be anything from, preparing adaptation strategies for coping with extreme weather events like heat waves or floods or droughts, or minimizing non-climate stressors. So that's things like removing invasive species. So while that invasive species removal might not be directly climate related, we're removing one of the stressors for many species in the region, which will increase future resilience to climate change. So looking at what species and ecosystems are vulnerable, why they're vulnerable, and targeting adaptation. We also need to figure out what trees we should be planting in the region. We know that shifts in climate conditions are expected to outpace tree species migration capacity. And I chose this slide because it's very evident. We don't have a lot of aspen in the region, but you can really see the suitability zones and how different they are and how much they're going to shift over the next 100 years just for this species alone. So if we're looking, if we're planting between 40 and 125,000 trees every year in our watersheds, we need to know what species we should be planting. We also need to know where to get our tree seed from. And some of the other things we're looking at are how we manage our forests to better sequester carbon and our soils as well. And I'm just going to touch a little bit about on this because I think it's interesting. I was fascinated by this, but because our forests are diverse in species, but each species obviously is also made up of unique, locally adapted individuals and populations. So any plan to adapt to climate change must also incorporate genetic fitness and diversity as well. So the map over on the right-hand side of the screen is where our future forests lie. So we're looking at, the Carolinas, sort of Indiana, southern Indiana area. And we've been working with Forest Gene Conservation Association to look at basically how we should be collecting seeds. So currently we collect local seed, and we're looking at potentially supplementing that with seed, 25% southern seed sources. And this is particularly important for the Essex region because, of course, we can't go to another conservation authority and say, can you give us some of your seed? We actually need to make those connections, cross-border connections as well, with nurseries south of the border. And then the other picture there with the trees, that's something like an assisted migration trial. So planting, something that we might want to do in the future as well. Plant a number of different seeds that were sourced in different regions and see how well they do in our climate. So these are all sort of things that we need to think about and are starting to think about for our own programs at IRCA. And I just want to touch also on the mitigation side. So one of the things that we've been really pleased to be able to do on behalf of IRCA and the Windsor Essex Climate Change Collaborative is help the region facilitate a regional energy plan. And this was done over the last 18 months with the County of Essex. And a regional energy plan, while it's a mitigation plan or a climate plan, we know there will be benefits to our economy, our society, and our culture in terms of reducing energy costs and creating jobs and numerous other co-benefits of just reducing greenhouse gases. So I'm really pleased to note that the plan was approved last week at County Council, and a big shout out to my County of Essex colleagues. I think a few of whom are on the call this evening as well. We did something together with over 50 individuals that normally takes other communities over 2 years to do. We accelerated it knowing that there was benefit and green recovery opportunities from COVID. And these are just some of the folks that were involved. It turned out to be a fully virtual plan. We started right when the pandemic hit. And we had everybody in the meeting during the last meeting. We had everybody add up all the kilometers that everyone would have driven to get to just 6 meetings. So most of these people are local in our 7 municipalities. Some are consultants that were outside or in the GTA, but 6 meetings, everyone would have driven 34,000 kilometers just to get to these meetings. So I thought, I don't know, I thought that was really cool. So we were able to save 6.6 metric tons of greenhouse gases just by doing this all virtually. And now we know we can do a plan completely virtually as well, which is exciting. So we have 3 main goals through the plan, focused on principles of environment, energy and climate, and respecting climate science, economic and social, and responsibility and reliability as well. So in terms of the environment, we want to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 60% by 2041 and achieve net zero by 2050. And that is in line with federal targets as well. We want to return at least 15 billion to the economy and create 1,000 jobs by 2025. And we want to increase energy efficiency by 50% by 2041. So we collected a ton of data. So we spent the first 6 months collecting just a ton of data on about 81,000 lots. We collected things like impact data, which showed us the size, the age of the home, how they heat their home, all of those pieces. And anyway, this is what we did with it. We also got gas and electricity data from our utilities, which were major partners on the plan as well. And this is what the data told us about greenhouse gas emissions. So obviously we see a large impact from the very successful greenhouse sector in our region. I don't think that's surprising, but a huge impact from transportation and residential as well. And so what we did, we have these number of observations. We used a lot of best practices and benchmarking in our plan, which I know are sort of tenets of what Thrive is using. And nothing in the plan is not achievable. These are all, we benchmarked against regions with similar climates. And we know that energy and intensity in homes and buildings are more than twice global best practice. Efficiency is significantly lower than most systems. Greenhouse gas emissions per capita are about 5 times best practice. And if you take the greenhouses out, they're still 3 times best practice. Transportation and greenhouses are 70% of all emissions. And most of the $820 million that was spent on energy last year, so $820 million spent on gas, diesel, electricity bills, Enbridge gas bills, leaves the county. So it goes to other areas in Canada where it's produced, or other areas where it's generated. And obviously it leaves your pocket as well. And we expect that energy cost risk to increase from 200 to 500% by 2050. So we have a number of strategic directions coming out of our energy plan. Everything from efficient homes and buildings to efficient greenhouses, efficient industry, efficient transportation, efficient local supply and distribution, community planning, and data-driven insights and reporting. So it has to be, this is clearly an all hands-on plan. It needs to be community-driven, and it needs to, in order to be fully implemented. So multiple private-public partnerships, community engagement, the whole 9 yards. I'm just going to go into a few of them in a little bit more detail, perhaps the ones that I think might align best with some of Thrive's existing initiatives. But one of the things we need to do is make homes and buildings more efficient. And I'm sure you've seen last week, I don't know, please let me know at the end of this if anybody managed to get on the federal government website to sign up for their $5,000 grant for either new windows, doors, or solar panels, because I couldn't, it kept crashing on me. But one of the things that we know we need to do, and not just in this region, but across Canada, is make our homes more efficient through home retrofits, new doors, windows, insulation, and ensure that new building codes meet the new buildings meet the very strict Ontario Building Code, which is one of the best in Canada. and ensure new area developments could even exceed the Ontario building code. So that is the Greener Homes grant that the federal government is offering. But we need to figure out ways in order to make these home retrofits more accessible for people. And whether we do that, we're talking about setting up a retrofit entity so that we can make it cheaper and more efficient, essentially. And I just also wanted to touch on one thing, because I think there's some real estate folks on the Thrive board as well. But one of the things we've sort of been kicking around and haven't talked about too much as a strategy, it is a strategy, but this is identified in other plans, is energy home labeling as well, and bringing up the energy literacy in the general public, and especially to new homeowners. One of the recommendations in the plan is to undertake this EnerGuide labeling program of homes, just like you'd find on your washer or dryer. You label your home, and certainly it tells us what the energy performance of that home is, and it can be a real selling feature of a home as well. I came across this excellent big sign in the city of Vancouver, which I really loved. We need to be talking about these great projects and publicizing them. And it sort of leads into the one of the priority projects, which is to develop a climate and energy literacy program. And education is more than just information sharing. It's about engagement, it's about skills building and resourcing, and it's about motivating the next generation as well. And we've got some very motivated students in this region as well. So there's many dimensions there, but this is a sort of a critical piece of it as well. On the efficient transportation side, I think there's great alignment here with Thrive's direction to increase active transportation, and beyond sort of the health aspect of getting on a bike and the healthy communities aspect. We need to figure out how to get people running errands on their bike. I think I heard a couple of weeks ago on the Thrive webinar about getting somebody's child worked at the Sobeys and getting them safe access on a bike to the Sobeys or whatever it is, whether it's going to the grocery store or the doctor. That's how we reduce the number and length of vehicle trips. So there's some targets directly listed in the community energy plan or the regional energy plan that Thrive might want to consider adopting, like increasing those, whether it's passenger kilometers traveled by transit, which might be more challenging in communities where there isn't a transit system. Currently, I think something like 0.0001% of people in the county travel by transit. But there are new alternatives for transit and on-demand transit and things like that. And one of the priority projects in the regional energy plan is to identify a community to undertake an e-mobility strategy and provide access to visible electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which will be key to alleviating consumer concerns about where people charge their cars. We're expecting something, I think our targets in the regional energy plan, and we're seeing it happening. In 20 years, 80% of all cars are going to be electric vehicles. And I love this too, this other picture up there, that little e-mobility cart taken in the winter in Essex. I'm not sure it should be parked on the sidewalk, I don't know. But anyway, it's great, I love that. And so how do we get more people moving around in vehicles like that? And this is a little bit more complicated, but how we supply and distribute energy. So it's not just necessarily about solar panels, but that's certainly part of it. But it's also about using things like district energy systems. So those are when you might integrate solar and geothermal heat with waste heat from industry, local industry and commercial buildings. And you're able to integrate those diverse energy sources into one system in a neighborhood and supply those to the homes. And so, in fact, it increases reliability as well, because then customers aren't dependent on a single source of energy. And finally, this measurement and continuous improvement in creating a smart energy seeing a lot of conversation around automobility Canada, automobility changing Windsor from the automobile capital of Canada to the automobility capital of Canada. And I think that's really exciting. I think there's some incredible opportunities here to become sort of the smart energy community where you're able to sort of see in real time energy uses, and you can use those platforms for analysis and reporting as well. And I'm almost done here. If we do all of these huge transformative things and all of these energy plans, we joined, I think, 400 communities in North America with an energy plan. These plans are transformative, and there's a lot of work to do. But if we are able to, this is where it should take us. So you see on the left-hand side is 2019. We're projecting forward to 2050. We've bent the curve on we're going down the curve on greenhouse gases, but we're still a ways out from that federal goal and looking at net zero for 2050. So we've got a lot of work to do, but this is the path to get there. And at the same time, we also know that there's substantial energy savings here as well. So here's where we've bent the curve on energy costs. So, we spent $820 million in 2019 to $500 million in 2050, which is a cumulative savings of $28 billion. And these are really conservative figures because with the Supreme Court ruling on the constitutionality of the federal carbon tax last month, along with announcements that the carbon tax will rise to $170 per ton by 2030, this just makes economic sense as well, right? So like it's almost isn't even an environmental discussion at all. It becomes really one of financial gain. So the timing of the approval of the REP is really, really important. It aligns well with the counties and several local official plan updates. And research shows that successful community energy planning is only possible if energy is integrated with the entire land use planning process. So I've been really fortunate to be able to work with the region's planner on this energy plan. And while this is and it has been a community effort, there is going forward, this isn't all on the municipalities. This is a region-wide plan. This is a plan where I think entrepreneurs should see opportunity, where there's opportunities for investment and public-private partnerships across the board. But there are certainly, important role for municipalities in helping to convene and facilitate these and enabling some of these policies, figuring out where people should park their, electric scooters, I don't know. Leading by example, of course, in their own fleets and buildings, and helping with things like energy and climate literacy as well. And on the adaptation side, there is a lot of opportunity for municipalities to undertake local climate planning as well. The town of Essex has done that. They just, about 2 months ago, came out with their climate adaptation plan, and the city of Windsor has a climate adaptation plan as well, their second one, with a number of policies or support for policies as well. So finally, I just want to repeat that, it's hard not to get bogged down in the details and the impacts of climate change. But, climate change certainly presents opportunities. It presents opportunities to use climate change as the driver for change. And I think we're seeing that. I think we're seeing that with Thrive, obviously. It presents opportunities to find innovative ways to assist communities, starting with showing leadership and addressing their thirst for knowledge. And I took that from the Ontario Emergency Management Review. But that almost to me speaks to what Thrive is trying to do, and to tell your own story. And very quickly, the last thing I have to say is, I'm sure people have heard this before, but this is my story. This is my daughter. And yes, this is like an existential crisis for me about climate change, but it's also about my daughter. And I look at her standing on that asphalt, playground at her daycare. And, you know, what are the immediate things that we can do to improve the thermal comfort for our students, for our, you know, elderly, for our more disadvantaged who don't have air conditioning, all of those things. And, you know, my colleague at the City of Windsor did a thermal comfort study at parks, and you know these playgrounds can get up to 50 or 60 degrees in the midsummer sun. So you know at a really immediate level, how do we, you know, when they have to keep kids inside because it's too hot, you know, that really bothers me, right? You know, is she going to be able to play soccer? Or is it going to be too hot? Is she going to be able to swim in the lake in the future? You know, and this year we had a great time building an ice fort because we actually had ice cover. Is there going to be ice cover often again in the future? I don't know. And you know, I think whether you like to build an outdoor ice rink in your backyard and it hasn't been freezing over, or you like to watch birds and you know we might see a real shift in bird populations, water sports or boating or fishing, or if you like to drink local wine, like I think, you know, or you own a farm and you know, disappearing or shifting family farms, I think climate change impacts all of us. And I think it's important to be able to tell your story because, again, it's not just about the polar bears or the ice caps. It's about things that are happening every day. And, you know, when you don't want to go outside because it's too hot or there's too many ticks, that's not okay. That is impacting our everyday life. So that's all I have. And I'd be happy to, it went on for a little too long, sorry, but I talk a lot about climate change. So I'm happy to take any questions at this point as well. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Claire. So if anybody has any questions for Claire, you can simply raise your hand in Zoom or add it to the chat, and we'll ask you to unmute if you have a question. So just to get things started here, we have one question in the chat so far. This is from Philippa. The region's largest employer, Windsor Regional Hospital, is hoping to move to a greenfield location in Sandwich South. Has the net greenhouse gas impact of this mega project ever been evaluated? Do you know the answer to that?
So I don't know the answer to that. I will tell you right off. I do know that you know that area is being looked at for like something like a district energy plan. But that would certainly be something to follow up with the City of Windsor climate change person about. Okay. Because it would have been included in their energy plan.
Okay, great. Again, you can raise your hand in Zoom, add it to the chat, or simply unmute yourself and we'll get to you. So we've got a couple hands up here. We'll go to Sarah Palmer.
Hi, for the great presentation. Really enjoyed it, and it opened my eyes a little bit more than what I've known about this region. I'm a civil engineer by education, and I love the fact to hear that we can go to a system where we evaluate homes. I know bigger buildings have the LEED award system based on how much energy efficiency is put into that building. Is there any talk about this region going above and beyond what the building code requires? Is that a municipal basis? Is that a region basis? I work for Ford Motor Company, and we're shifting towards electric vehicles. I would love to see a mandate that all new homes are built with a charging station, where you can charge the system through the night, where rates are cheaper, and then charge your vehicle throughout the day, or charge your home throughout the day. Is there any talk about any systems like that?
Yeah, so Ontario again has one of the strongest building codes. It's updated every few years. I would expect that some of those would eventually will make their way into the building code, things like the electric chargers. And it only makes sense right now as well. It's a huge missed opportunity if you're building a home or building a development not to include electric vehicles, because, it really in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to be seeing huge shifts in the way we move around the community. So, I think we will start to see that. I agree, it needs to be in the building code, and the building codes need to be enforced as well. And I know we've got capacity issues there, but certainly it's something that can go in also in things like development guidelines and policies for municipalities as well. So, I think there's multiple ways to address things like that.
Okay. All right, so we'll just we'll check over in the chat here. Somebody's asked if this presentation will be available. Yes, it will be available later. If you weren't able to catch the whole thing, we'll be adding this to our YouTube channel. So we'll make post on that on the Thrive website and Thrive's social media as well. Okay, so we will go now to, there's another question in the chat from Yasminka. Thank you, Claire. Can you expand a little more on the connection between climate change and affordable housing? Housing is an issue on Amherstburg's agenda in the near future, and drawing those connections may be useful. Thanks again.
Sure. Yeah. And, I again, it's not my area of expertise, but, I find it so interesting that I've sort of been brought into this space of community development through this work. And, I've met a lot of people sort of outside the immediate climate change world or biology world or conservation authority world, because climate change crosses, every sort of piece of our life and every department in a municipality and certainly around affordable housing. And I think there's a lot of new research out there about climate change and affordable housing. Obviously, I think, yeah, again, I'm not a social scientist. I see the link there. I'm thinking about, and again, through the pandemic, like, the pandemic was just this added challenge of when you look at equity and how how we're addressing it in our communities with the climate change challenges. And, we're going to experience these huge heat waves, even things like schools and how keeping students cool in the summer, or sorry, in the late spring, because again, we're going into a heat wave next week. If school was in, students would be suffering in those classrooms. So I think there's a huge piece of that where, again, it's this vicious cycle of, those that have less are going to be suffering even more because of climate change.
Okay. There's a comment here on the chat as well from John. I heard this week that Canada is losing the equivalent of 5 family farms per day to development. We are not only losing our ability to grow food, but we are cementing over the land. We should have a national master plan to protect our farmland.
Yeah, I think that's I think as a conservation authority, we assess development on the watershed basis, and so we look at things like how much impervious surface in a watershed, but we also know that these that and in the end, more rain and more cement means more flooding downstream. In some regions, I think in Detroit, there's a sort of stormwater surcharge. So the more cement you have on your property, the more tax you pay to cover the stormwater costs, because we know that some of these stormwater plans that municipalities are having to do. I know Tecumseh, City of Windsor, Lakeshore, they've all done stormwater master plans. In order to stop people's basements from flooding in the future, the costs are enormous. They're absolutely, enormous. So if you have more concrete on your land where stormwater can't soak into the ground properly, you pay more in the stormwater tax. So that's how some municipalities are addressing it. In terms of farmlands, obviously, I think we're seeing a shift. Our farmers are challenged to the nth degree around here, and they will continue to be challenged into the future with climate impacts.
Thank you. Okay. So just a reminder, if you have any other questions, just raise your hand in chat or add it to the chat. We've got Phil here with a question.
Claire, great presentation. Really terrific. And I think the whole energy plan, is really first. And congratulations, I think, to the county and to our municipalities and the Conservation Authority and our county planner, Rebecca. But you put two slides up, the same slides, and you had basically an adaptation map, and part of it related to urban forest. So the urban forest is important in a lot of senses, in the sense of buffering us from climate change and cooling our environments. But I'm going to talk specifically about the town of Amherstburg. And this is an example that came up actually from the opportunity to naturalize large pieces of property by the city of Windsor, specifically at Windsor Airport. And the goal was that if you had to basically say that I'm sequestering carbon in the sense of an urban forest, and we're going to take the strategy that Chicago took. So Chicago basically plants trees one zone higher than we currently are. They're taking Carolinian species, which is another slide that you had on. But how do we get compensated for it? So other provinces have the ability to say, we have a piece of property. We have the Libro Center. We have a little park called Warren Mickle Park. We have a number of little parks where naturalization, Ranta Marina or Ranta Memorial Park, huge opportunities to naturalize. And we're often met with challenges to naturalization. But the value of naturalization, when it comes to the fact that now you want to develop and to bank that, is there any movement from the climate scientists like yourself, or climate agencies like IRCA, that is there any opportunity out there that we can now say to our community, not only is it a good idea because it reduced the municipal costs, we don't have to cut grass anymore, we're going to naturalize, we're going to let it grow, we're going to plant trees, we're going to plant thousands of trees in some of this acreage, we're going to sequester carbon, but now we get credit for it. And that credit can be applied to when now you start talking about development, and hopefully not development in agricultural lands, as the previous question said, but you talk about development in the sense of, we're taking those areas that are within the allowable footprint for development. Did I lose you, Richard?
You're still there, Phil. Go ahead.
Yeah. So is there any movement that we can gain some compensation ground? We can get credit for this, because I think there'd be a huge sell for a municipality like Amherstburg to say, naturalize 30 acres of the 120 available at the Libro, but you get credit for it.
So that's not quite the question you said you were going to ask me, Phil. This is maybe a little bit harder than the one that you tried to prep me for, but I'll try to answer it. In terms of habitat banking, I don't know. I don't know about in terms of habitat banking, but some of the things you have touched on, I've been really interested in exploring, and some of that is around municipal natural asset inventories, right? So assigning values to some of our natural areas, and not just ecosystem values, but actually the replacement value. And municipalities are going to have to do this soon, include natural assets in their inventories. what is the replacement value of that wetland? You know, and then I think so, and then I also the side of that is looking at natural, you know, say you have a stormwater pond and then you have silver maple swamp. You know, what is the value? What is the stormwater value difference on both of those? I think there's a lot of things that we could explore in terms of that. And then on the other side of that is the carbon sequestration piece. And of course, that is starting, we are starting to learn more about that. There are frameworks coming down from the federal government on how to, exactly what you're talking about, right? How we can sell carbon credits for planting trees. But in some of the research that we've done, it's complete afforestation. So planting, you know, an ag field or a piece of, you know, vacant land or something with trees is not a very effective method for carbon credits, for acquiring carbon credits, because it takes such a long time for that forest to grow, unfortunately. But what is really effective is managing our current forests, or what we have, to better sequester carbon. And so these are also some of the things we're looking at with research partners at the University of Windsor is, you know, how can we better manage not just our forests, but our wetlands and our ag fields even, to better sequester carbon. And whether that's through above ground vegetation or, you know, looking at biodiversity or below ground. There's some really interesting work and professors at the university working on sort of below ground carbon and what that looks like, and stimulating below ground growth of roots in order to sequester carbon.
Just a supplemental to this, Claire. You know, Matthew Child, who was a former IRCA employee, and I'm a former IRCA employee, and here you are, an IRCA employee. You know, we all hoot hoot. So the fact of the matter is, we looked at this. Other provinces are doing it. So I think the challenge here, and this is something I think that we as Thrive, and I'm a board member of Thrive, and with smart people like you and Rebecca Belanger, who's our regional planner, we got to get to the point, I think, that you get credit for this, because the credit is important. Because not only does it mean the economy of naturalization, but it also means that you've put it into the database. We're now, so again, like my 101 urban forestry used to say that forests grow at 3% tonnage per year, right? So your average forest, the forest I have here in my 40 acres, grows at 3%. Well, if you do the math on, and you're absolutely right, the new forest isn't doing anything for you, because it's not, it's growing so slowly, it's establishing. But to come to the point we get credit for that, and I think from a climate standpoint, you got to bring, we got to find a mechanism to bring this into economy. And because I really do think the energy plants, all those things, like I said, they're first, I mean, go to active transportation, get off of fossil fuels, huge, huge, huge. Well, we have a great opportunity in Amherstburg, not only with the fact that we have a great surplus of park space. Most of our park space is natural already. It's actually in the footprint. We're never ever going to develop it. It's the Big Creek watershed. It's some of the most big. It's one of the biggest footprints in Essex County, next to Peely, Hillman, and you know, and maybe Cedar Creek. But to manage that, right, and to get credit, whether you're a developer, whether you're a municipality, whoever you are, to say, bring that into the footprint where now this is carbon sequestering, but we don't get credit for it now. Alberta does. And I think we have to drive some of that into our own, you know, again, this isn't something that Amherstburg is going to do. This is not something that Essex County IRCA is going to do, but I think we need to start to look at it to get credit for our ability to take blank footprints, to shut the moors off and to really get some of this footprint established, and to get this into the mindset of our public, saying this is a good thing. This is a good thing overall.
Agreed. Let's work on it. You have nothing else to do right now, Phil. Come on. You can change Ontario.
Call me, I'll help you out.
That's good. No, but I 100% agree. Like, and again, it's changing our mindsets, and some of it is around, monetizing nature, right? In some ways, or assigning value to these things. And I don't think it's a new concept, obviously, but I think we're doing it better now, and there's an opportunity, I think, to do it here for sure.
Great. Okay, looks like there's just one final comment here or question in the chat from Lisa. Amazing presentation, Claire. Some of the local data that you presented, like the greenhouse gas emissions per capita and the local dollar energy value that leaves the county. I don't see this kind of data in the fact sheets on the WEC3 website. Are there plans to make more KT resources of your data? These are examples of the facts that change minds. We have a youth network that might be able to help make such KT resources if these don't exist now.
So yes, and I should have mentioned, all of this is actually housed on the County of Essex website. I put the link in the chat. I believe I did send, we have, the website now needs updating, but there's some, all of our reports are on this page here, and big shout out to our county communications who have helped us with all of this. There's also the executive summary on that page as well, which is much sort of easier to read as well. But one of the things that we found really successful with the energy plan and engaging youth, we did have youth members on our community task force. And at the suggestion of one of our Greater Essex County District School Board partners, is we had a grade 11 student through a co-op do a lesson plan on the regional energy plan. So she did a 20-minute little lesson that was recorded. She provided additional resources and a hands-on activity. And now that's gone out to all of the teachers in Essex County, right? So that was just a general overview of what the Essex, or sort of what our energy use is, the region, and what we can do as individuals. But I think there's huge opportunity to do more of that, right? And to get our students telling these stories, and especially with things like TikTok and all of the great social media out there, really ways to tell stories about things like urban planning, because I know our planners struggle sometimes with things, they're trying to do the right thing for climate change, which is, intensification and putting more buildings in the downtown core. But, people sometimes don't want that because they're worried about traffic and all of those pieces. So is there a way that we can use our students to help tell that story, and do a lesson plan on urban planning or something like that? Totally not my idea at all. I'm stealing that from our couple of our, but I think it's a great idea because I think people are trying, and we've got some really great planners in the region, but sometimes it's hard to plan for climate change.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Claire. That was a fantastic presentation, very informative, very insightful. Really appreciate you taking your time tonight. I'm just going to turn it over to Lori just for a few words.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was a lot of information, a lot of fascinating information. And if everybody here tonight is anything like me, I know that I will be looking for books to read, and luckily here I am in a bookstore. So we have a pretty intense climate change section, nature and environment section. Feel free to browse our website. Feel free to come on in if you want. We have books on the environment for every age group, from the very littles to senior citizens. So absolutely come by anytime. Our curbside hours are 12 to 5 daily. We hope to be opening soon. As soon as we get that notice or that announcement from the government that we can open, we'll be open. And we hope you all come down to Open Air Amherstburg, enjoy our beautiful downtown, stop in here, stop and get a frozen yogurt or a cookie. be sure to visit us, and hopefully, fingers crossed, that will happen sometime around the June 18th weekend. So thank you all for coming out. Thank you, Claire, and the River Bookshop is very happy to partner with Thrive on this event, and I hope there's going to be more in the future. Thank you. Back to you, Corey.
Great. Thanks, Laurie. So just want to close here. Just want to say thank you on behalf of Thrive. Thank you everyone for joining in tonight. We have many more presentations lined up that will focus on the Thrive initiatives. Some of the upcoming presentations will be exclusive for Thrive members. So if you haven't had a chance to sign up yet, visit our website at thriveamherstburg.com to learn more and to sign up. Our next presentation is June 14th, and the topic will be affordable housing, presented by Fiona Coughlin and Leilani Farah. To stay up to date on Thrive Amherstburg, be sure to follow us online. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you just go to our website at thriveamherstburg.com, all the links are in the top right corner. So thanks again for joining in tonight. And this concludes tonight's presentation. Thanks.